Chapter 17. Yet another bumpy landing. Mr. Penguin squeezed his eyes shut and tried to ignore the fierce wind whooshing all around him. On his shoulder, Colin was grinning madly. He glanced behind him, then tapped Mr. Penguin's forehead. "I'm not looking at anything until we've landed, Colin," yelped Mr. Penguin. But Colin kept tapping until Mr. Penguin had no choice but to open his eyes. Colin was pointing his leg back towards the village. A knot of residents were standing watching them go, including Edith and Dita, who were jumping up and down and waving encouragingly. Then Mr. Penguin saw what had caught Colin's eye. The mysterious stranger in black stood in the shadow of a King Ludwig von Klonker statue. He was just as Colin had described, sinister and creepy. As Mr. Penguin watched, the man took one last look at the cuckoo plane, then disappeared into the gloom with a swish of his leather coat. Mr. Penguin groaned. Not only was he flying into goodness knows what peril at the fortress, he had left two of his friends in danger. It was at this point that Mr. Penguin made the mistake of looking down. Ooh, they were high. So far, in fact, that they were even above the clouds, with only the large and icy tip of the old Grandfather Grimm mountain for company. Mr. Penguin clamped his eyes shut again. "Mr. Penguin!" cried Lyle. "We need to land! Pull the lever!" But poor Mr. Penguin couldn't pull anything. His flippers were frozen stiff with terror. The cuckoo plane smashed into a clump of frozen trees and bumped down through the branches. It hit the ground and chucked its passengers out most impolitely. They tumbled across the snow before coming to an abrupt and slightly ouchy stop against a boulder. Mr. Penguin stood up first and straightened his bow tie. His head was all wobbly and spinning. "Oh dear, oh dear, oh dear," he cried, glancing over at the cuckoo plane. "We won't be able to get back to the village. Look, it's ruined." As they looked at it, one of the wings broke off, the propeller crumpled, and one of the eyelids started doing a weird wink-twitch thing again. Mr. Penguin started waddling around in circles, flapping his flippers and groaning miserably. He only stopped when Colin lobbed a frozen pine cone at him. Lyle stood next to the wrecked mechanical bird and eyed it up calmly. "This isn't good," she said, "but I might be able to fix it. I'll have to if we ever want to get home." She rummaged around in the plane's bottom and pulled out a little toolbox. "It's a good job I packed this," she said. "I'll stay here and get fixing. You two will have to go to the fortress without me." Mr. Penguin gulped. He wasn't sure what was more worrying, being trapped on this freezing mountain or facing whatever was inside. "Go on," insisted Lyle, rolling up her sleeves. "It's getting dark and we don't want to be stuck out here for the night. We might be gobbled up by ferocious beasts." As Mr. Penguin fussed with his bow tie again, an image of Gordon in his hamster costume flashed into his mind. His friend was probably feeling frightened too. "Okay," he said, "let's go." The climb to the fortress was very steep. There was nothing left of the ancient path, and the snow came up to Mr. Penguin's bow tie, so Colin kung fu kicked, kapow, a track up the mountain. "Thank goodness you're here," Mr. Penguin said through his chattering beak. "Otherwise I'd be really stuck." A blizzard began swirling around them. It was like being shaken in a snow globe as they tried to trundle upwards. But then the storm stopped, and suddenly the fortress was revealed, a monstrous, weather-beaten building with an enormous black iron door looming above them. "Doesn't look very welcoming, if you ask me," said Colin's pad. "I agree," said Mr. Penguin, shivering. "Looks very dangerous." But Mr. Penguin nodded. "Very dangerous indeed," said Colin's pad. Then, without breaking eye contact with Mr. Penguin, Colin slowly underlined the word "very" with a thick black line. "All right, Colin," said Mr. Penguin. "No need to go on about it." Mr. Penguin waddled slowly up the crumbling steps. Colin stashed his pad away and followed. With a trembling flipper, Mr. Penguin knocked on the door. No answer. "Oh dear," he said cheerfully. "Looks like no one is at home, so we'll just get Lion and fly back to the village. Come on." And he turned and ran back down the steps. But Colin wasn't going to be beaten by something as silly as a heavy, definitely reinforced solid iron door. He furrowed his monobrow, took a deep breath, and kapow! There was a dreadful clanging sound, and the door opened with an ominous groan. It hadn't been locked. Curiosity got the better of Mr. Penguin, and he found himself climbing back up the steps. "How strange," he whispered. "If you were up to no good, Why on earth would you leave the front door unlocked? Anyone could just wander in. Little did he know that he was just about to find out in a very alarming way. Then we've got a short letter here. My plan is simple. I am going to take over the world. I spent my childhood performing for the rich and the powerful, and now I think it's high time they performed for me. How thrilling it will be to have everybody under my spell, doing my bidding forever.